Promoter Bob Arum says that this Terence Crawford Errol Spence unification at welterweight is impossible to do without pay-per-view, which I would estimate probably means this fight ain't gonna happen anytime soon. Unfortunately, it is the most talked about fight in the welterweight division currently, but it seems a long way off because Crawford has been on pay-per-view before, but he's done very poor numbers and he's commanding some pretty big purses, okay, relatively big purses. Errol Spence has never been on a pay-per-view in the United States before in terms of headlining a pay-per-view. He was on pay-per-view in the UK against Kell Brook, but in the United States, his home country, he's never headlined a pay-per-view. So for this Terence Crawford Errol Spence fight to happen, both guys would need to be paid a significant amount of money. Not just because they're top fighters and world champions, but because to take the risk of fighting each other, they'd want extra money, you would have to imagine, and understandably so. It's a risk-reward situation, and that's pretty much what Bob Arum says here in this particular article. He says that currently this would blow Showtime's budget, and it will put a big dent in our budget, which is the ESPN budget, if they were to make the fight happen without pay-per-view. So it has to be pay-per-view. He says he would love to sit down with Al Heyman and Steven Espinoza from Showtime and work this out so it isn't just idle conversation. Hopefully they do get to sit down and work it out. But I can't imagine that this fight will happen anytime soon. I certainly hope I'm wrong. I would love to be wrong because I want to see this fight. But the way it currently stands, I doubt it. I personally think we'll probably see Errol Spence or Terence Crawford take on the winner of Danny Garcia versus Sean Porter before they face each other. And then, of course, there's Keith Thurman. We don't know what's going on with him. He's been very inactive because of injuries. We don't know where he's at with the rehabilitation for his injuries. We don't know how he's going to be when he comes back. Because if you remember, Keith Thurman wasn't keen on facing Errol Spence or any top fighter without having a few comeback fights from his surgery, you know, a few warm-up, tune-up type fights, obviously against top 10 opposition, but nobody who's elite. So he wanted a couple of rehabilitation fights before stepping in there with an Errol Spence, or you would have to imagine a Terence Crawford. So whenever Keith Thurman does come back, is he going to jump straight into a unification? Judging by what he said in the past, it would seem unlikely. So, yeah, it looks like we're going to have to wait on this one, people. Definitely a fight I'm looking forward to. Definitely a fight I want to see. But given the purses that both guys are going to demand, given the fact that it's going to be a cross-network fight, it's going to be an Al Heyman sit down with Bob Arum, and those are never easy. They don't necessarily have the best relationship. You remember Bob Arum tried to sue Al Heyman. So we'll see if they can put their differences aside and get this fight done for the good of boxing. But at the same time, you have to remember that Bob Arum will be, to some extent, protecting his commodity. How many pay-per-view fighters does Bob Arum have? Terence Crawford has got a big following, at least in his home state. And his crowd is a great crowd, Terence Crawford. When his people went to watch him in Vegas against Jeff Horn, I mean, they brought the same atmosphere they generate in Omaha, Nebraska, to Vegas, and it was a great atmosphere. So that whole situation with Crawford, I'm sure Bob Arum wants to try and preserve that and prolong that for as long as he can, you know. Anyway, let me know what you think about this situation in the comment section below. It's Hatman, I'm out.